And Doris, I mean, you're a presidential expert. How do you rate President Obama in the pantheon of great presidents, or just presidents?
Well, you know, when you think about the great presidents, usually, like old Abigail Adams once said, great necessities call forth great leaders. So George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, FDR had these huge crises to face. Obama had a pretty serious crisis, the financial crisis being second only to the Great Depression. He did accomplish in health care something that presidents since old Teddy Roosevelt had been trying to accomplish. But I think most importantly, we'll see now the fact that he's got a second term. That's really important to embolden him for what he can accomplish, and more importantly, to show that the country supported, during a very difficult time, his leadership, and they wanted him back again. So I think he's got a shot. It depends a lot on what happens in the second term. If he can create, I wish he'd go in the midterms to try and take the House back. I mean, I think in some ways that might be the only thing to break this dysfunction. But even if he doesn't get the House back, if he's able to somehow build on that electoral majority that he had this time around. Ronald Reagan lasts in history because he built an electoral majority that lasted after him, FDR too. So that's the direction that I think, by mobilizing his base, that he might be able to go.
What was interesting to me, Doug Brinkley, was when I watched the Lincoln movie, was you saw there a very different kind of atmosphere in Congress amongst the representatives of the American people. There were people there prepared to go against their party line because of moral and personal principle. I don't see a lot of that going on these days. Do we need to get back to that?
Well, remember, a point of history is to remind us our own times aren't uniquely oppressive. Lincoln may have had a little more of that advantage, but half the country had, after all, just bolted and formed the Confederacy. So it wasn't very happy times for Lincoln. But it is inspiring that this particular inauguration is the 150th of the Emancipation Proclamation. And Doris's book has just really influenced this president more than I think any other book of our time, Team of Rivals. He references it. His first term, in many ways, with bringing Hillary Clinton and others in, was part of it. But on this second term, and particularly for this inauguration, I would ask people to read FDR's second inaugural, given in 1937, because FDR had inherited the Great Depression, started his New Deal programs, and we had an incrementalism out of that Great Depression, and he evokes that in the speech. And this president, Obama, inherited the Great Recession, and he has a time now to, I think, talk about how we're incrementally getting better, but we're not whole if middle class and poor people still aren't part of the American dream.
I mean, Doris, is the key to this a mixture of personal courage by a president at seizing the moment, but also thinking big and bold? Because FDR had a much worse inheritance in many ways than Barack Obama, bad though Obama's was. But you just got a sense of somebody who had his hand on history and thought, right, I'm just going to go for this. And I feel at the moment that Obama, he shows signs of wanting to do that, but at the moment he hasn't actually done it.
Well, I think what happened is he ran on a hope that he could be above ideology, that he could bring red and blue together, and it just proved very difficult, if not impossible. I think he's learned that lesson. The most important thing to look for in a second term is, what does a president learn from the experience of the first term? And already you see much more fiery kinds of language. You see him willing to draw the lines. And I think that boldness, I agree with Doug, I think the second term might well be bolder, just as FDR's was bolder than the first term. FDR had it easier in certain ways. It sounds crazy to say that, but we were in such terrible shape that we had to do something, and the country looked for leadership. It was less clear what we needed in the financial depression than it was in the real depression. So I would say the second term is going to be the mark of what happens. This is an obvious statement, the mark of what happens in the future.